Rivers conceal numerous secrets within their depths, harboring the haunting remnants of tragedies and crimes. This was precisely the experience of the residents of a small town when, on a dreary day, the waves brought ashore the lifeless body of a young girl who had tragically lost her face. Indeed, this unsettling incident occurred in the small town of Warra, situated in a remote southern region of Oklahoma, USA. With a population of approximately 2,000, it is a tranquil community where everyone is familiar with one another, and life flows at a leisurely pace. In the fall of 1996, one household in Warra was home to the affluent Gale family, consisting of Mother Gale, Father Dwayne, and their 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter named Heather. At the time, Heather was a sophomore in high school, distinguished not only as an outstanding student but also as a cheerleader. She had blossomed into a striking young woman, drawing attention wherever she went. Known for her kind disposition, Heather also possessed a spirited, adventurous streak. At 16, she found herself in a rebellious phase, eager to explore all that life had to offer. On the evening of October 2, 1996, a dispute erupted between Heather and her mother regarding a $300 phone bill that Heather had accumulated while chatting with friends. Gale was frustrated by her daughter's perceived irresponsibility, while Dwayne approached the matter with a more measured attitude. The family was enduring challenging financial circumstances. Dwayne, an electrician, had recently suffered a severe injury from a transformer explosion. His recovery required extensive treatment and skin grafts, rendering him unable to work, which compelled his wife to take on additional employment to support the family. The family was under financial strain, with every dollar being crucial as the father faced costly surgeries. The mother attempted to convey to Heather the importance of managing their limited resources, explaining that they could not afford to pay bills that totaled hundreds of dollars each month. She aimed to instill in her daughter a respect for money, an appreciation for the struggles of elders, and a desire for independence. However, the teenage girl struggled to accept these lessons, which ultimately led to a significant argument. Once tempers had cooled, Heather chose to retire for the night. As she passed through the living room, she wished her father good night but deliberately ignored her mother, signaling her lingering displeasure. With this somber atmosphere, the family members each retreated to their respective rooms. The following morning, October 3 RD, Gale followed her usual routine of waking the children for breakfast. However, Heather did not emerge for an extended period, which Gale attributed to typical teenage defiance. She believed that hunger would eventually compel her daughter to come downstairs, despite her rebellious attitude. Yet, Heather never appeared. Growing increasingly concerned, Gale decided to check on her daughter and was taken aback to find her room empty. At that time, cell phones were not widely used, and Heather did not own one. The anxious parents reached out to all of Heather's friends, but none had any information regarding her whereabouts. This behavior was entirely out of character for Heather. She had no history of mental health issues and had never run away from home. Furthermore, she was known for her meticulous attention to her appearance and would unlikely leave for an extended period without a change of clothes or makeup. Notably, all of her belongings remained at home. Without delay, Gale and Dwayne took action. The couple arrived at the sheriff's office in Warra to report their daughter missing. The mother recounted an argument with Heather the previous day, during which she had scolded her daughter for an excessive bill from a recent outing and for her stubbornness in refusing to acknowledge her mistake. The parents were increasingly concerned that Heather's frequent conversations with her friends had escalated beyond reasonable limits. Although Dwayne typically maintained a calm demeanor, he sided with his wife on this issue. The sheriff attempted to comfort the anxious parents, suggesting that their daughter had likely run away, a common occurrence among teenagers, particularly following disputes with their parents. However, Gale and Dwayne felt this behavior was uncharacteristic of Heather, who usually sought compromise rather than avoidance in the face of conflict. Unfortunately, the mother's intense reaction and the girl's inability to admit fault had culminated in this troubling situation. Despite the parents' worries, law enforcement officials reassured them that most similar cases tend to resolve themselves, as teenagers who leave home often return after reflecting on their actions. It was possible that while Gale and Dwayne were at the sheriff's office, Heather had already returned home. The officers continued to provide reassurance, explaining that a girl could only be declared missing after a full day without contact. Since this timeframe had not yet been reached, the police could not process their report and advised the couple to return home and await news from Heather, leaving them feeling disheartened. The demeanor of law enforcement led Gail and Dwayne to suspect that something had occurred to their daughter, prompting them to initiate their own search in the town. Their first step was to reach out to the girl's closest friends, including 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team, with whom Heather had previously been in a brief romantic relationship. Despite the end of their romance, they had maintained a friendship. Notably, it was Randy with whom Heather had recently accrued a significant phone bill. When Gail contacted him, he claimed to have no knowledge of Heather's whereabouts or any events that might have transpired. Although his tone appeared convincing, Gail sensed that Randy was concealing something. His responses seemed rehearsed and robotic, and he exhibited little concern for the disappearance of his former girlfriend, which raised her suspicions. Unable to catch Randy in a lie, Heather's mother decided to reach out to another friend, 17-year-old Josh Bagwell, who had recently begun dating her daughter. When Gail called, Josh's grandmother answered and informed her that he was resting after a party, refusing to wake him. The elderly woman was busy cleaning up the trailer where the teenagers had gathered the previous night and stated that she had not seen Heather. With no helpful information obtained, the anxious parents continued their search throughout the town. In a desperate attempt to uncover any leads regarding their daughter's location, a county family faced a day of fruitless searching. After exhausting their efforts, Gail and Dwayne returned to the police station, where law enforcement finally agreed to initiate a search operation. A week elapsed without any significant information emerging about the missing schoolgirl, and as time progressed, the hope of finding her alive diminished with each passing day. Subsequently, while conducting an examination of the outskirts near the Texas border, police patrols discovered a body floating face down in the river. The remains were partially submerged in the murky water, and observers on the bridge noted that the skin of the unidentified victim was obscured by a thick layer of dirt, seemingly placed there to conceal the body. When divers retrieved the horrifying discovery from the shore, a far more disturbing reality was unveiled beneath the mud. The victim had suffered extensive mutilation, with numerous buckshot wounds indicating a close-range shooting, likely from a shotgun. The disfigurement of the face rendered immediate identification impossible, necessitating a forensic examination. Investigative experts later determined that the victim had been shot 9 times at close range, once in the back of the head and 8 times in the back. The body was in a horrific state, appearing to be torn apart. At that time, only one individual was reported missing in the area, prompting authorities to contact Heather Rich's parents for identification. They were able to confirm their daughter's identity solely through an engraved name ring that had been given to her by her mother, thus eliminating any remaining doubts that it was Heather lying on the morgue table. The identity of the deceased was ultimately verified through dental records, as forensic specialists discovered non-removable braces in the oral cavity of the disfigured body, which belonged to the schoolgirl who had been using them to correct her bite. The news of the young cheerleader's death rapidly circulated throughout the town, becoming the primary topic of conversation the following day. Within hours, the entire local community was aware of the tragedy. Football player Randy Wood also learned of the incident, which coincided with the annual match where he had been celebrated as the king of the game for several consecutive seasons. Typically, such events would be followed by exuberant celebrations. However, this occasion was devoid of joy. Randy was devastated by the shocking news regarding his ex-girlfriend and later visited the bridge where her body was discovered. He gazed into the murky waters for an extended period, concealing a dreadful secret from everyone. In truth, Randy possessed far more information than he disclosed to the parents of the deceased, and soon the investigation directed the police towards him and several of his friends. These occurrences mirrored the narrative of a chilling Hollywood film, as 3 teenagers transformed an ordinary evening into a horrific massacre in the heart of a small town in Oklahoma. One of the individuals hailed from a wealthy family, another was a star football player and team captain, while the third was a novice street thug. Once the detectives commenced their investigation, they first interviewed Heather's parents. By that time, Gail had already reached out to numerous friends and acquaintances of her daughter, expressing her suspicions. 2 young men, Heather's ex-boyfriend 17-year-old Andy Wood and her current boyfriend Josh Bagwell, returned from a party without even attempting to contact her. The woman was convinced that the boys were concealing something, as it appeared that the high school students were reciting a rehearsed narrative, with their phrasing aligning in several instances. However, they struggled to provide clear answers to follow-up questions, which raised suspicions. The teenagers exhibited noticeable nervousness and were hesitant to engage, in stark contrast to Heather's other friends, who actively participated in her search. Gail and Dwayne sensed that Randy and Josh possessed more information than they were disclosing. Through conversations with classmates and other acquaintances of the deceased, investigators uncovered several leads suggesting that Josh and Randy had knowledge of the events surrounding the tragic night when Heather left home following a dispute with her mother. It later emerged that Heather had indeed planned to attend a party to meet her boyfriend Josh, despite her parents' prohibition against leaving the house late at night. This rebellious teenager, after ensuring that Gail and Dwayne were asleep, climbed out of her window around 11:00 p.m. to meet the two young men, who were well known and popular among the local youth. Josh, in particular, was regarded as a wealthy heir, often seen driving luxurious cars and wearing fashionable attire, proudly showcasing his family's affluence as a quintessential member of the privileged youth. Randy Wood, unlike his friend who prioritized personal fame and wealth, hailed from a modest background. Through his exceptional talent and determination in sports, he achieved a level of recognition that rivaled that of his affluent peers. His teammates admired him not only for his striking looks but also for his remarkable skills on the field. Randy earned the title of the best football player, not just in his school but throughout the city, and even garnered attention from school teams at the state level. He and Josh were inseparable, often spending their weekends cruising along dirt roads in Josh's car. Their social circle frequently included girls, and the boys regularly consumed alcohol and occasionally smoked marijuana, as the town offered limited entertainment options for youth. Consequently, they resorted to improvisation for amusement. It was reported that Heather Rich often joined this group, and a friend revealed that she had also experimented with alcohol. The night before her disappearance, she left to socialize with the popular boys, a revelation that deeply troubled her parents. Although they were aware of their daughter's inclination towards risky behavior, they were unaware that she was engaging in such activities with young men. Notably, 5 days prior to her disappearance on September 27, 1996, Heather and another girl from her support group were discovered at the stadium with marijuana and smoking paraphernalia. It was also revealed that they had been consuming alcohol, leading to their suspension from school. For 3 days, the educators communicated with Gail and Dwayne regarding all pertinent matters, openly expressing their outrage at the unexpected involvement of their 16-year-old daughter in such perilous activities. Heather confessed that her experimentation with illicit substances stemmed from curiosity and vowed to cease her actions. Nevertheless, her parents were primarily troubled by a different issue, the reason behind their diligent student and athlete's deviation onto this troubling path. The young girl's inclination towards alcohol and drugs was alarming, and despite her assurances of reform, Gail and Dwayne found it impossible to ascertain her genuine intentions. Ultimately, these detrimental habits likely contributed to her tragic demise. The detectives opted to interview Josh and Randy, the last individuals seen with the murdered student, in hopes of uncovering details about the party that preceded Heather's disappearance. The captain of the football team revealed that he and his companion spent the evening in a trailer behind Josh's residence, engaged in a game of dominoes and drinking. However, both young men denied any interaction with Heather that fateful night. Notably, the police observed the same unsettling details that had concerned the deceased's mother. Both boys recounted their story with an uncanny uniformity, as if rehearsed, and exhibited a lack of emotional response despite discussing the death of their mutual friend. This behavior led law enforcement to suspect that the teenagers were being deceitful, with a theory emerging that jealousy may have played a role in the murder, stemming from their inability to share the girl. At that stage, the investigators lacked substantial evidence to directly associate the high school student with the crime. Nevertheless, the peculiar behavior exhibited by Randy and Josh intensified the police's suspicions regarding their potential involvement, leading them to become the primary suspects. Consequently, it became imperative to examine their backgrounds, relationships with Heather, and the events surrounding the party held the night before her disappearance with greater scrutiny. The autopsy findings offered new insights. Notably, the number of gunshots was striking 9 in total, whereas police shotguns typically accommodate only 8 rounds in their magazines. This raised the question of why an assailant would reload to fire an additional shot when the victim was evidently deceased. Another noteworthy aspect was the type of ammunition utilized, the so-called double buckshot, which possesses excessive lethal force for a 16-year-old girl. Fortunately, this specific choice of ammunition provided a significant lead for the investigation. These uncommon rounds were available at only one store in the city. Upon reviewing the sales records, the police discovered that only one individual had purchased them shortly before the murder. The store clerk identified the suspect as Josh Bagwell, a high school student who had bought an entire box containing 20 rounds. According to the store employee, another young man accompanied Josh, but it was not his close friend Randy, rather, it was a certain Curtis Gamble, a person well known to the local authorities. It was revealed that Curtis was the oldest among those implicated in the case. At the age of 19, he had already faced multiple arrests and spent a significant portion of his life in juvenile detention centers. This individual exhibited troubling behavior and had consistently attracted the attention of law enforcement. He had been apprehended for offenses such as driving under the influence, discharging a firearm at animals, and even targeting random pedestrians. Consequently, Curtis became a primary suspect, in stark contrast to the other two young men who, despite their peculiar behavior, had no prior legal issues and were not regarded as aggressive or dangerous. On October 23 RD, police officers visited the residence of the juvenile offender in a nearby town. Notably, just a few kilometers from his home lay the bridge where fishermen had discovered the dismembered body. Curtis was not present at home during the visit, but law enforcement officials spoke with his grandmother. She provided insights about her grandson, mentioning that he was familiar with the area and frequently visited the bridge, a location he had cherished for fishing since childhood, often accompanied by her. This revelation indicated that Curtis had a more significant connection to the crime scene than the police had initially anticipated. The following day, detectives were able to meet with Curtis, who was subsequently detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Werer. The interrogation extended for over 8 hours, however, the suspect remained largely uncommunicative, although he consented to undergo a polygraph examination. The investigation revealed that Curtis's most significant admission was regarding his ownership of a rare firearm, specifically a Mossberg shotgun, which features a 9-round magazine. This led detectives to believe they had identified the owner of the potential murder weapon, as Heather had been shot with that particular type of gun. Upon seizing the weapon and conducting a ballistic analysis, experts confirmed that the schoolgirl had indeed been shot with Curtis's shotgun. Faced with evidence linking him to the murder of the young cheerleader, Curtis ultimately confessed. He disclosed to the police that he had involved two friends, Randy and Josh, in the crime, subsequently providing a detailed 2-page confession. 3 weeks after Heather's death, law enforcement had a suspect who admitted to the offense. Given the possible involvement of the other young men, Randy and Josh were also apprehended and taken to the station. The schoolboys were presented with Curtis's statement, in which he claimed he had instigated the attack on the girl, while Randy had executed the act. According to Curtis, he had handed his shotgun to Randy and instructed him to shoot the innocent victim, with Josh merely being a bystander. However, the police expressed doubts about this account, as the football team captain did not conform to the profile of a typical criminal. Previously, he had no legal issues, had been an exemplary student, and was a successful athlete well liked by his peers. There had never been any negative remarks made about him, particularly given the geographical context of the events, which unfolded in southern Oklahoma while the body was discovered in Texas. The boys faced trial in this specific state, where the death penalty is applicable for murder. This presented a significant challenge for the investigation, as local laws indicated that the actual perpetrator could be prosecuted, leading to a reluctance among the suspects to accept responsibility for the fatal shot. It was only after persistent efforts by law enforcement and a subsequent meeting with investigators that Randy began to provide testimony. However, he firmly denied any direct involvement in the murder, asserting that Curtis was the shooter and the instigator of the attack on Heather, while he claimed to have merely assisted him. In contrast, Josh refused to cooperate with the authorities. Consequently, in October 1996, detectives received 2 confessions that were inconsistent in several respects. Ultimately, the investigators determined that Randy's account appeared more credible, especially since he had successfully passed a lie detector test. It became evident that establishing the precise sequence of events on the tragic evening of October 2 ND with complete certainty would be challenging. Nevertheless, they chose to rely on the information provided by the captain of the football team. According to his statements, Randy had intended to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh that day, and it was during their gathering that Heather was expected to join them. Although she was familiar with both Josh and Randy, she had never met Curtis, leaving her unaware of the potential danger he posed when the four of them came together. Heather, like the rest of the group, found herself teetering on the brink of unconsciousness after having a drink. It was during this vulnerable moment that Curtis, inebriated, conceived the idea of exploiting her defenseless state. He swiftly moved to act, as Randy later recounted. Heather awoke amidst the assault, screamed, and attempted to push her assailant away before losing consciousness once more. Despite her incapacitation, Curtis felt a surge of fear. He understood that even a partially intoxicated victim could retain memories of the incident. He was acutely aware that a confrontation with the law would not be favorable for him, and he had no desire to face imprisonment due to this event. Consequently, he proposed the drastic measure of eliminating the girl. Initially, the younger boys perceived this suggestion as a poor attempt at humor, but Curtis was serious. He retrieved a shotgun from his car's trunk and aimed it at the three teenagers. Realizing they were dealing with a dangerously unpredictable individual, Randy and Josh chose not to contest his orders. They loaded the unconscious schoolgirl into the trunk of Josh's vehicle, and the group set off toward Curtis's residence. However, a few kilometers from their destination, Curtis commanded them to divert to a bridge, where the victim's body would ultimately be discovered. He compelled his friends to halt in the middle of the bridge, ordered them to extract Heather from the trunk, and position her by the railing. Fearing for their own safety, Randy and Josh complied. Once the unconscious girl was removed from the vehicle, she was unable to support herself. The young men laid her on the ground and returned to the car, unable to fathom the gravity of the situation. Curtis approached the defenseless Heather and began to shoot her. Randy witnessed the horrific moment when a large hole appeared in his classmate's skull. Overcome by the gruesome scene, he covered his face with his hands, too terrified to look in that direction. The assailant discharged the entire magazine of the shotgun into the victim before he and Josh discarded the girl's disfigured body off the bridge. They then fled the crime scene in their vehicle, fully aware of the atrocity Curtis had committed against Heather. Their fear for their own safety compelled them to remain silent. In October 1996, the three young men were formally charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Rich. Investigators faced significant challenges, particularly with Josh Bagwell, who refused to testify and against whom there was no direct evidence of involvement. The prosecution had to depend solely on the conflicting statements of the other two defendants, as the absence of physical evidence rendered the case less reliable. To address this issue, the prosecutor offered Randy Wood a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Josh, promising him life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Randy accepted the offer without hesitation. The prosecutor's office also consulted with Heather's parents regarding a similar sentence for Curtis, emphasizing that their primary concern was obtaining truthful testimony from him rather than seeking the death penalty for the underage mastermind behind the murder. The family primarily sought to uncover the truth. On October 15, Curtis accepted a plea deal from the prosecution, admitting guilt in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, he exhibited defiant and inappropriate behavior while in custody. At one point, Curtis assaulted a guard, knocking him to the ground and attempting to strangle him. The situation was only brought under control through the combined efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, nearly a year and a half after Heather's tragic death, the trial of Josh Bagwell commenced. The case had garnered significant public attention, leading to a high demand for courtroom access, which ultimately resulted in restrictions on both random spectators and members of the press. The defense team employed various strategies to defend their client, including attempts to discredit Heather's character by portraying her as an alcoholic and promiscuous individual who had allegedly engaged in a relationship with Curtis and subsequently threatened him with exposure. This narrative forced the parents to defend their daughter's honor and dignity. In truth, Heather was a dedicated student, a talented athlete, and a person of high moral character who unfortunately fell in with the wrong crowd and encountered a genuine criminal. When given the opportunity to speak, Curtis surprised those in attendance by reverting to his original account, asserting that Josh had not been involved in the crime and was unaware of it entirely. Randy's testimony regarding the murder plans revealed that it was Curtis who had fired the fatal shot, a revelation that profoundly impacted him. In a surprising turn of events, the captain of the football team took a drastic measure by rejecting the plea bargain. He was determined that his confession would not be perceived as merely an attempt to evade responsibility by implicating his accomplice in the courtroom. Randy asserted that his primary motivation was to seek justice for the innocent girl who had been murdered. This decision was made despite the counsel of his attorney, who advised against it. Randy's courageous choice, though noble, placed him at significant risk of facing the death penalty. His selfless actions left a lasting impression on Heather's parents, who subsequently met with him after the court proceedings. This principled stance held great significance for the family of the victim. On February 10th, Randy appeared before the jury and recounted the harrowing events of that tragic night, leaving no room for doubt about the involvement of Josh and Curtis in Heather's murder, as well as Bagwell's role in covering up the crime. On February 14th, Curtis Gamble was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and the intentional execution of this grave offense, resulting in a life sentence with an additional 99 years. In May 1998, a meeting occurred between Heather's parents and Randy during a live television talk show, despite the immense grief they endured from the loss of their daughter. The affluent couple conveyed genuine admiration for the integrity and profound remorse exhibited by the young man. On August 7, 1998, the trial of Randy Wood concluded, resulting in his conviction for his role in the murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. This verdict brought sadness to many, as Wood was the only one among the three defendants who truly regretted his actions and, at great personal risk, chose to reveal the truth to the jury. The general sentiment in society was that the young man did not merit such a harsh sentence. In contrast, Josh Bagwell received a life sentence without the possibility of parole and was incarcerated in the same facility as Curtis. In January 2002, both inmates attempted a bold escape, successfully evading capture for 10 days while hiding in Texas. A nationwide manhunt ensued, ultimately leading to their recapture and return to prison to continue serving their life sentences. Adolescence is a notably challenging and transformative phase in an individual's life, and it is often the actions and decisions of parents during this time that can significantly influence their children's futures. Until we meet again.